in the speech recognition. So thank you, John. I think that the reason why 14 people are here might be partially your discovery of old data from George Miller and interpretation by Butchart, I believe, or whoever came up with this. John is very good in one thing. John is very good in taking somebody's data and reanalyzing them very carefully. And I think that this is a wonderful thing. And I hope that he will tell us more about it, because I think I don't have to talk anymore, right? Because I think that whole thing is running. So I didn't expect to have to talk that long, I have to tell you. I mean, so I didn't prepare anything. So I was or if it sounded confusing, then you know why.
What's needed? But
welcome, John, and we are very happy to have you here.
What he forgot to mention is that we became very, very close friends, and I'd love to enjoy an evening over a few beers. So I got into this problem, as you just heard, through my work in cochlear modeling. I'm happy to see Murray here today. He represents somebody from my other life. I was very, very active and still am in cochlear modeling. And then I learned about Harvey Fletcher by reading.
This is the second mention.
Yeah.
Count.
So there was, let's keep it relevant here. But okay. So my wife introduced me to Harvey Fletcher, and as a result of that, I became smitten with the work that went on at Bell Labs in the 30s, and I read all the papers and absorbed. I stopped working on what I was working because I said, I'm not as sophisticated as this guy was. I'm wasting my time. I need to go back and learn what those guys knew. And that was an education for me, and that's how I learned about the speech problem, and through the articulation index, which Harvey Fletcher invented the articulation index. And I realized that the speech problem was far, far more important than what I was doing. But what I was doing was relevant to this bigger problem. So I went to people like Larry Rabiner and a lot of other people and said, look, we need some basic research on speech perception. And I got a good resounding pat on the head and was told to go away, that I was naive and ignorant and obviously didn't know what I was talking about. And so that's pretty much what I did. I went away and I went to the University of Illinois, and with a startup package 3 years ago, I got 8 graduate students to work on this problem. And it would be very, very arrogant to say that I've solved the problem. That certainly is not true. But it would not be a misrepresentation to say I made one hell of a dent in it, and I now understand from a fundamental perspective what is going on in human speech recognition and what people are listening for and where is the information. And I'm going to attempt to demonstrate that to you directly through a bunch of live examples. I'll do this live, and anything can happen. This is the 4th time or the 5th time I've given this talk. I gave it at Cambridge a few days ago. I gave it at UCL, University College of London, in David Kemp's lab. I gave it at King's College. I was all over London. I gave it at the University of Wisconsin, and given it here because I gave it at the University of Illinois. So I hope all goes well. It's about the role, the cochlea and speech recognition are fundamentally and intimately related to each other. And what happens when you lose a little bit of cochlear hearing loss as you grow older, you lose your ability to process speech and noise. And this is a fundamental thing, and you will experience it if you live long enough. And it's a very weird thing also. What is it about the cochlea that is responsible for your ability to discriminate speech and noise? Well, we don't know the answer to that question, but I have a pretty good idea of what's going on, but I can't prove it. And I'm going to tell you about that too. So what was it? What are the goals of this project that I set up? UIUC is the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, HSR is Human Speech Recognition Group. That's my group, and these are our goals. We want to understand why speech recognition is robust to noise. So this research is motivated by Shannon's channel capacity theorem that says that the channel capacity, think a talker, an environment, typically has noise in it, and a listener can be modeled as a channel. This is Shannon's formulation of the problem, and he says that the channel capacity is the integral of the log of 1 plus the signal to noise ratio integrated over frequency. Well, there's something called the articulation index. It was formulated in 1921, and it says exactly the same thing. It says that a sufficient statistic to characterize speech, this is what Harvey Fletcher showed, is the sum over critical bands of the log of 1 plus the signal to noise ratio. And he showed that in 1921. And I don't know how old Shannon was in 1921, but I'd venture to say he probably wasn't born yet. It struck me.
Oh, he was born.
He was?
Right.
Okay.
I think he's 1917 or something like that.
Okay.
John, was Fletcher's thing really an empirical curve fit?
No.
So there was
I have several papers on that. Fletcher derived this result by saying he low pass filters and high pass information, that information added, and he got back this formula from this transformation that made the transformation additive. So if you high pass and low pass filter a signal, half of the power will be in one band and half of the power will be in the other band, and you look at the power and the curves will cross, the cutoff frequency, it'll cross at 50% of the power is above and 50% is below when the two cutoffs are equal, and the power is equal. You get half in one band, half in the other. He did exactly the same thing to information in speech processing. It's a very subtle and beautiful argument, and he got in this formula that I just told you, it got to the articulation index. So he formulated this problem very, very early in his career. So I'm motivated by trying to use the channel capacity formula to get at the problem. So speech is a very complicated business. Speech communication is too complicated. We can't solve the problem because it's too complicated. There's too many bits. It's a 10-bit problem. There's thousands of possible ways of going about it. So turn up the noise till you get a 1-bit problem. So just turn up the noise so much that you can just barely discriminate one sound from another and solve that problem. And then turn down the noise by a little bit and solve the next problem. Conquer it by simplifying it. That worked. But everybody said, we're not interested in the problem of speech and noise. Well, I say you should be interested in the problem of speech and noise because that's the problem that we have to deal with. That's the real problem. And in the process of understanding what happens to speech and noise, you will also understand speech, and then you can understand speech and quiet, which happens to be also in noise, okay? So human listeners are hypersensitive to small amounts of noise if they have cochlear loss. And speech recognition systems act like they have a 40 to 60 dB hearing loss. This is not a complete accident. These are related. Now, you can take my word for it, or you can tell me I'm nuts. How could it be? But that's my analysis of the situation. So there's underlying acoustic features that support the recognition of the scores. So I'm going to give you some raw data and fill in these things, but we want to understand how hearing impaireds recognize speech. This is a kind of a holy grail problem. It's everybody, as they grow old, they can't understand speech, and if we could make a hearing aid that would enhance the features that support the actual phones, then we could return your hearing back to a better state. Why do hearing impaireds have problems with speech and noise? Well, how do these errors change with hearing loss? What are the nature of the errors? And my hypothesis, which is more than a hypothesis actually, is given an outer hair cell cochlear loss. Outer hair cells are certain cells in the cochlea that are responsible for many of the cochlea's properties. They're nonlinear. The cochlea is a nonlinear signal processing unit that acts as an edge detector in a nonlinear modality. And these outer hair cells are responsible for that. It's also a bank of bandpass filters that have slopes that are thousands of dB per octave. There's incredible filter characteristics going on in the cochlea, and it's nonlinear to boot. And when you lose your outer hair cell processing, you can't understand speech and noise. Well, that's a good place to start looking. What about outer hair cell processing that might lead to SNR loss? SNR loss is a terminology for the property that a person needs more signal-to-noise ratio than a normal in order to understand speech at the same score. Okay? So this is just the name for that property that I was telling you about. Okay, so this is some motivational data. So the first thing we need to know is, well, I mean, John Allen keeps talking about how wonderful humans recognize speech. Where are the numbers? Well, it turned out there weren't any. We all know that humans do extremely well, but speech recognition community, bless their little hearts, they knew that if they took their recognizer and tested it in noise, it would fail miserably, and then their funding would dry up. So they didn't do the test. And if I'd say, why don't we do this test? They'd say, oh, no. Well, we're not interested in noise. I said, well, are you interested in science? Well, actually, no. We have very practical problems. We don't care about any of this stuff. Just go away, John. No? So I measured the data, okay? So here's the data, and it's surprising. So this is the signal-to-noise ratio in decibels, wideband SNR, and this is the scores. And each one of these curves corresponds to a different consonant. So it turns out that there's 3 different groups. There's the gray group, or bluish gray, there's the green group, and there's the red group. Now, this is in a published paper in JASA, January JASA. So if you want the details, you have to go to get that. But these are like the fricatives and the sibilants. And these are the core group. This solid black line is the average. So on average, in quiet, 18 dB SNR is really in quiet. This shows a score of about 1.5% to 2% error, total averaged across all the different consonants. There's 16 consonants with 1 vowel. This is pa, ta, ka, fa, fa, sa, sha, ma, na, ba, da, ga. Ma, na. Well, I think I got them all, 16 of them. And there's 18 talkers, and we started off with 20 listeners. And so we measured the listener sitting in the booth would hear embedded in noise, pop, would shh, shh, and there'd be, couple hundred milliseconds, half a second worth of noise. Then they'd hear the consonant in isolation, the CV, 16 consonants, 1 vowel, and they would have to identify it. And then they'd click, the mouse on the screen. They'd find out which one it was, and it was like 5 hours per subject to get this data, and we had, as I said, 18 talkers, and we started off with 20 listeners. But this has been pruned to 14 of the better listeners.
And sorry, their task was to identify which consonant it was?
Yeah.
From a set of how many?
16.
16, sorry.
16 consonants and 1 vowel. In noise. So by the time you get to minus 18, minus 20 dB SNR, you're still better than chance. That dashed line there is 15/16, that's chance. And at quiet, the score is about 2% error. And Fletcher found 1.5% error. His subjects were more highly trained than mine. And all my subjects were L1 English with listeners, but they spoke other languages, whereas Fletcher's did not. Now there's some sounds here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 consonants, that the errors are in the order of 1 in 1,000, 2 in 1,000. The error is so small that our sampling error is greater than the estimation error, but you can see where this curve is going. And the nice thing about plotting log error versus a articulation index, or transformation of the SNR is that you get straight lines on those curves. So we like to plot error instead of score. It's much more interesting to know how small the error gets as you go to higher signal to noise ratios, and if you plot the score, this thing just saturates at 1 and you don't learn anything. And you also get curves that tend to be straight lines when you plot it against the AI, which I said is a transformation of the SNR. So this is the way we plot this data. So normal hearing listeners can identify CV sounds in as low as 22 dB wideband signal noise ratio. This was speech-weighted noise. In this case, we also use white noise. White noise is easier than speech-weighted noise. And this is published in JASA, Phatic and Allen. And hearing impaireds cannot hear simple sounds even in small amounts of noise. So here's the same data, same kind of an experiment for hearing impaired subjects. And some consonants they don't get at all. And the best they do is on the order of the 2% error range, and most of them are in the 20% and more. So this is exactly what I was telling you about, that these people, even with moderate to severe hearing loss, they might have a 40 or 50 dB hearing loss, and it's cochlear in origin, they don't do well at all.
I don't understand how you define hearing impaired, since you say that we are all hearing impaired. So who are these guys?
No, you're hearing impaired.
I am, all right.
He's hearing impaired. Jeff Zweig is not hearing impaired, I assume.
Well,
the young ear is not hearing impaired. It's not true that everybody's hearing impaired.
All right, everybody's so do you have an age cutoff here? You know, how did you select this cohort?
This person is clinically hearing impaired.
Oh, this
They
is
wear
one
hearing aids.
person. This is not an average.
That's one person.
I see. Well, this is an average,
This
right?
is subject 12, right ear, in
Uh-huh.
white noise.
I see. And these people are an average.
They're clinically hearing impaired. These people are normal hearing people. They're young college kids.
Yeah.
But just while we're talking about the subject population, before you talked about outer hair cell loss, as if you either had it or you didn't, but are there different patterns of,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it shows up in this data gangbusters, and I have another talk that's another hour that's connected to the end of this one, and it goes into all those details. And yeah, you can have varying degrees of hearing loss.
different frequency ranges?
Absolutely, of course, yeah. And that will cause your scores to be very different, and your fusion patterns are different, and that's a hugely important topic.
And when you say speech-weighted noise, you mean people are talking in the background, is that right?
No.
What do you
We
mean?
took thermal noise and we filtered it to have the same power spectrum as speech. And it's interesting, if you take a top infinite sample of speech and you delay it by a large amount, let's say a second, and you add it to itself, if you do that 10 times, it'll just sound like a lot of people talking in the background. If you do it 128 times, it sounds like a lot of people talking, a lot more people talking in the background. If you do it 512 times, it's still, you can hear individual people. But if you add speech to itself 1,000 times, it sounds like noise. Doesn't sound like speech anymore. So this is the basic model. We have to have a theoretical model. One time at Bell Labs, I was thinking, you know, there's no theory of speech recognition. So how can it be? So I went around to everybody and I said, I'd like to call a meeting, lunch meeting. We all get down on one of those great big tables at Bell Labs. And I said, I called you all here. Vishnu Atal was there. Fred Jont was not there. Larry was too busy to come. But all of the researchers were there. And they said, what do you want, John? What's going on? So we get our lunch, we sit down, and I said, tell me what's the theory of speech recognition? People went, wait a minute. There is no theory of speech. Oh, first they said, oh yeah, there's a theory. So we went around the table. What's the theory of speech recognition? Vishnu went last. Pretty much concluded there was no theory of speech recognition, and we pretty much concluded that wasn't a very good situation. And it was a damn interesting conversation. And Vishnu says, we've got to develop a theory of speech recognition. So that was on a Friday. So the next Monday, I walk into my office, and Fred Jont is waiting for me. He's mad as hell. He says, John, you have been destroying the morale of my group. And I said, what did I do? he says, you're telling them terrible things, it's demoralizing them. I said, Fred, all I said was, we need a theory of speech recognition. Oh, he was so mad. But, you know, we got over it. But it was true. How can you, you know, run a program if you don't, it was just a seat of the pants crank turn. So I decided I would develop a theory of speech recognition, which is what I've been doing. So this is kind of the basic idea. This comes from psychophysics, Boring's book on psychophysics. You have the physical side of the house, and you have the psychological side of the house, and you have your listener. This is the channel. You add noise, you have a speech source, you add noise, you have the channel, which consists of the room acoustics, which are pretty trivial, and then the listener, and then you have the psychological response. So what we need is a measure of the physical and a measure of the perceptual, and we need to compare those two, and we need to be working on the basic raw problem, the one-bit problem. Turn up the noise, have a measure of the input, have a measure of the output, and the sizzling interface, put those two things together and find out what's going on. It's a plan. So based on this idea, this is high level. Start at 1,000 feet and start to approach ground, okay? This comes screaming down. So we have the AI-gram, which is the speech audibility measure of the physical side. And we have the confusion matrix, which is the perceptual side. And we'll show the bottom line. I could just tell you this and get up and leave, we'd be done. The bottom line, that it's timing. It's timing cues. There's a cross-frequency onset timing that you listen to, and those timings in different frequency bands are where the information is. Now, there's other places where the information is, but that's a critically important thing. Now, if you go back and you look at all the literature on speech recognition, whether it's human or machine, if you find a paper that says that, bring it to me. I want to read it. So, we want to find an event. An event is the perceptual feature. So we have acoustic features, like voicing, whatever. And we have perceptual features. These perceptual features are somehow encoded in the confusion matrix. If two things are confused, they have similar features, and if they're not confused, they are very dissimilar features. So, my student, Marion Renier, who graduated a couple of months ago with a master's degree at 22 years old. She's got her electrical engineering degree. Now she's looking for a job. And she's back with her mommy in Paris because she's so young, she doesn't know what's going on, but she's a genius. And I basically gave her this problem. I knew how smart she was. I gave her this problem, and I gave her all the tools, and I said, go in there and play with these tools and figure out what's going on. And she came up with a 4-step method to relate confusions to the audibility measure, which is the AI-gram. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Now I'm going to do what are the 4 steps. I'm just going to show you, and maybe if I remember I'll go back to what they are. So these 4 steps are encoded in these 4 panels. This is step 1, this is step 2, this is step 3, this is step 4. But we're going to go through them in a different order so that you can understand. So this panel down here shows the confusions as a function of the signal-to-noise ratio. So this is one row of a confusion matrix. How many people know what a confusion matrix is? So confusion matrix is, the row sum is 1, the diagonal is the target, and as you change the signal-to-noise ratio, the diagonal goes to 1, the matrix becomes the identity matrix in quiet. And as you turn the noise to minus 25 dB SNR, every diagonal has 1/16. Okay? And this is the diagonal for a ta, or a te. So in this particular sound, at 10 dB SNR, the scores were above 90, let's say 93%. So there was one error. And then at minus 2 dB SNR, the score was 90%. And then at minus 10 dB SNR, it drops like a stone. And the te is scored as pay. People said it's a pay. It's not a te anymore. First time we saw that, I didn't believe it. sent the student back to the lab to, figure out what was wrong with his MATLAB. So if you sit and listen at minus 10 dB SNR to this TE, most of the time you'll say it's a pay, 50% of the time. 20% of the time you'll report it as K, and 20% of the time you'll report it as TE. If you add a few more dB of noise to minus 16, TE is hardly ever claimed, but K and pay scores increase. And if you turn up the noise more, ultimately, it just goes to noise, and all you hear is noise. So that's called a confusion pattern. It's the row of a confusion matrix plotted as a function of signal-to-noise ratio. Now this is a very, very simple tool, the confusion pattern, and it took me 3 years to figure it out. And I was working with the confusion matrix and doing singular value decompositions and thinking about eigenspaces and blah, 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 blah. And then I just plotted it as a function of the signal-to-noise ratio, problem solved. Everything you want to know is in these patterns.
Does that reflect the prior probabilities of those sounds, or are people actually hearing those?
The prior probability is TE.
No.
Does it really all go? Does the diagonal really go to 1/16? Or are people more likely to hear P than T? Operate?
I'm going to play you with this
No,
example.
if
You're going to listen.
if
You're
I-
going to listen.
if
So
I
you've
tell-
taken all prior probabilities of English out and made them all 1/16 by experiment.
I'm using a maximum entropy source.
No, but if I tell you, I'm gonna tell you a sound, okay, and I don't tell you what sound it's gonna be, except maybe
Wait a
there's.
minute, you say you don't tell me the sound, but you are going to tell me the sound. Wait, I'm confused.
If you count the number of T's that you see in the English language, and you count the number of P's, and you count the number of K's, can you tell me the relative frequencies?
I'm leveling that. I'm setting all of the sounds equal. In my source, when these people listen to it, all of the sounds, all the 16 consonants are played with equal frequency.
Did people know that in advance?
Yes, absolutely.
So have you established that it does that perceptually?
Does
There's
what
no
perceptually?
residual bias towards the more frequent sounds. There's no tendency to hear the more frequent sounds.
Of course not, no.
Are you sure?
That's part of the experiment.
You know that. I mean, you can see that in the result.
Yeah.
But in other words, when you crank the noise up, people really
So
are
by,
equally
you're,
likely
you're
to
worried
report
about
it.
language effects,
Yes.
context
Right,
effects.
I would be interested to actually just know on that chart what are the prior probabilities in English of those sounds, just to establish that in fact those prior probabilities don't lie exactly on those lines you have.
If they use priors in that way, they will get a poorer score. Because the source here is uniform. So you're
It may not
going,
necessarily a phase optimal subject.
It would just be interesting to know the
the
numbers.
best observer is one that doesn't try to take any a priori information into account.
Yeah,
They
well,
know.
people.
True. These are people. And I'm one of the few people using people as subjects. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm fully aware of the problem. So one of the first things that I had to do, and where I had the most trouble and the most argument with people like Larry and everybody else, and all the linguists, and all of the people that I deal with in my life, they said, John, you don't understand. Language is a very, very powerful effect. And it's about language, man. Get it? It's about language. And I said, excuse me, Harvey Fletcher says otherwise. That's wrong. Yes, language is a very, very powerful effect. And therefore, if you don't control for it, you got trouble. If you want to run a scientific experiment, you got to control for language effects. Well, how do you do that? Harvey Fletcher tells you how to do it. It's very simple. You use a max-end source. Maximum entropy, uniform source. You take all your sounds, you draw them uniformly, you train your subjects, and instantly they figure out that these are randomly being drawn and presented. And they know that there's no advantage. There's no words in there or anything. And the priors on English, they're not even aware of it. Okay? They just know they're going to get one of these randomly drawn, and they have to figure out which one it was. And they're being paid to do a good job. And we fire them if they don't perform well. And that's not a problem.
So that remark that you casually made about 20 minutes ago about the 30 subjects being monolingual and the new subjects being multilingual, you don't think that has any effect on the data? Or can you show that there's no effect on the data?
If you took a subject, and we did it, that's Chinese is their first language and they have a strong accent and they have trouble with English because their accent is so strong, they don't do very well in this test.
The mix up.
And one of the big problems is, what?
They do TD and BP and so forth.
They mix up.
They discriminate at different points.
One of the things they do, we're way off topic here, but it's important to you, so I'm happy to talk about it. What they do is they confuse the vowels, for example. You play an E and they'll label it as an A. I mean, they have a different map. Their entropy, in quiet, their entropy is low, but their error is high. So they're highly consistent at the task, but they give you the wrong answer. So you need to train them, and it's not worth the trouble. Just get rid of them and go get somebody whose L1 is English. Yes, there are language effects like that, and you have to learn how to avoid those problems, and it's not all that difficult. Now, am I satisfying you with this? Because this is an important issue, and I don't want you to be left with some skeptical thing. Jont doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay, we've been there. I spent years of my life dealing with these language problems because that's what everybody thought the problem was. They thought the problem was about language. Well, it's not about language. Language is a very, very powerful effect. If you don't control for it, you can't do this kind of experiment. But the error rate is in these, well, the error rate is in the decoder. It's in taking the raw sound, the uniform maximum entropy sound, the consonant, the vowel, and decoding it uniquely into its original sound. That's why I showed you that first slide, that we can do this at minus 20 dBSNR. You know, I'm sure you know that if you took a speech recognizer, I sent a student to IBM and we used an HTK toolkit IBM recognizer that was trained to do phone recognition, and we ran the same set of data through that recognizer. What a disaster. I don't even want to tell you about it so bad. But by the time you get to 0 dBSNR, it says all the sounds are sa. Any sound you play it, sa. So it doesn't even go to uniform. The entropy goes to 0, and the error goes to 1. Well, 1 out of 16. It always gets sa right.
That's without any retraining.
I think so, yes. Well, what are you going to retrain it on? I mean, you can take half the set.
Well, it doesn't know the class priors that you trained your subjects on. So it's not, I mean, I understand your general point, but the comparison isn't quite fair.
We gave the recognizer every benefit of the doubt. So let's stick to what is the problem rather than what isn't the problem, okay? Because I'm burning up a lot of time.
Yeah, sure, go ahead, please.
So first thing is to understand that. Now the second thing is to understand the representation. This is like a spectrogram. This is the AI-gram. It's like a spectrogram, except it's a cochlear filter bank, and it's normalized to the noise floor. So right here you see white. That doesn't mean that there isn't any energy there. That means that the signal-to-noise ratio is less than 0 dB. So the log of 1 plus the signal-to-noise ratio, when the signal-to-noise ratio goes to 0, or minus infinity dB, log of 1 goes to 0. And so this is a decibel representation of a cochlear filter bank output normalized to the noise floor. So if you can see energy here, then you most likely can hear the energy. So we know from a lot of work that this somehow has all of the features in there that you can hear, and if you can't hear them, they're not there, and if you can hear them, they are there. Now this burst of energy from 3 to 8 kilohertz, frequencies along this axis, and it's also distance along the basal membrane, and this is time in centiseconds. And this is a plot of the AI-gram. It's a function of time, place, or frequency, and signal-to-noise ratio, and this was evaluated at 0 dB signal-to-noise ratio. So this is what the speech looks like at 0 dB SNR. Now let me go and actually pull up so this speech sound is M117 Te at 0 dB SNR. So I want M117, this is hard to work at this angle. M117 T Te. Open. I'm pulling up that sample and then I'm going to set it to 0 dB SNR. So there it is at 12 dB SNR. And you can see there's a lot more information available at 12 dB SNR. Now I'm going to move this to 0. Recomputing. Oh, so here it is. Now I'm going to play it. Te, 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 te. How many people hear te? Okay, so if we go and look at the scores, we're sitting right here. The scores from our 14 listeners at 0 dB SNR is around 90 or 89%, something like that. And the other thing that was reported was some low-level pays. So some people reported that they heard pay. Now think pay. Pay, pay, pay. Anybody hear pay?
No. John,
Yeah.
there's a transient before the syllable, isn't there? No.
This is what your ear is getting about approximately at 0 dB
There's
SNR.
nothing before that?
I'm going to turn down the noise and play it again. You might have a bad speaker system. Te, 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 te.
It's the onset of the noise that's sounding like.
Te, te. Worse than patting your head. Te. Now I'm going to snap this guy over here. And I'm going to.
I'm going to see this display here will show you what's on the screen.
Yeah, it was working at one point, but it's not working now. So I'm going to use the short time Fourier transform to remove this burst of energy at the front end here. So I'm going to delineate a region, and now that's been blocked, and I'm going to modify the speech using short time Fourier analysis synthesis, which is what you were hearing about. I worked on this one in the 1977. And now it's finished, and now there's the AI-gram of the new speech sound with that region removed. Now tell me what you hear. Hey, 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 hey. How many people hear te? How many people hear pay? Sorry, you're outvoted.
Okay. John,
He's
what
not
did you-
L1 equals English.
What did you remove?
Okay, I'm going to play the two back and forth, and you watch up in this corner. I'll put my cursor on there, and it's going to put out the AI-gram unprocessed and processed.
Are we allowed to hear hay?
That's in there. That's a possibility. Hey. 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 Okay, how many people are convinced that that burst of energy up there is an important distinction between te and pay? Good. Well, you're in agreement with Marion. It took Marion about a month to 6 weeks to figure that out. because she had a lot of other things going on that she was trying to do at the same time, and she was trying to develop an argument, and she says, that burst of energy reliably determines T. So she wants to have, because I'm driving her to do this, I want to have a rigorous procedure of demonstrating that T burst is what's carrying the information, okay? So she integrates this across frequency and produces this plot, which is the AI-gram as a function of time, and finds this peak. She knows that that T is where the information is, and now she makes an AI-gram. Instead of making the signal-to-noise ratio 0, she makes the signal-to-noise ratio a variable, and she holds the time at 17.5 centiseconds. So this is the same kind of an AI-gram, but plotted at a fixed time as a function of frequency and SNR, and she sees that this high-frequency burst goes into the noise floor and disappears just around the point where the T's come out of saturation. You see that? And this happens at a signal-to-noise ratio of around -6 dB or -4 dB, something like that. Now here's another example of Ta. And this example of Ta is subject 112, subject 12, male subject 12 saying Te at 0 dB SNR. And this burst is very much darker in this case. And it goes into the noise floor at -18 dB SNR, the burst of energy. The burst is at 27, 26 centiseconds. She makes the event gram, which is this display of the AI gram, as a function of signal-to-noise ratio. And lo and behold, where the burst goes into the noise floor, that's where the T comes out of saturation. And this is happening at -18. The other one is happening at -4. Same story. Completely different numbers. Different people's Te have natural variability, and everyone says it a little differently. And what's different is how much energy there is in that high-frequency burst. So if you don't add noise to speech, you can't figure this out. And you'll be averaging across all these prototypes and this data out of your Timet database, and you'll be averaging all this stuff together, and you won't learn squat. Because every sound is different. There's a 60 decibel variation in this T-burst threshold. So here's a figure in her paper where she plots the signal-to-noise ratio where it comes out of saturation against the signal-to-noise ratio at which the T-burst goes into the noise floor. And these numbers, these are for white speech-weighted noise, and these are for white noise. White noise, the signal-to-noise ratio is very different because there's a lot more energy at high frequencies. So these numbers go from -20 to +20, so I said 60. It's 40 dB range over which this T-burst goes into the noise, depending on the type of noise and depending on the utterance. Each one of these is a different utterance. Some utterances represented twice. This utterance is the same as that utterance. What's different is the type of noise. And here's an example again, just to remind you. When this thing goes into the noise, that's what determines this measure. And when the score comes out of saturation, that's what determines this measure. And there's an amazing correlation between the T-burst and the score for identifying T. Now, if that's not enough to convince you, we got another experiment to do it, as far as I'm concerned, QED. But no.
Let me make sure I understand this picture in the top left correctly. So you showed
Let's
us
go
this
to
AI gram.
different version of it.
So the AI gram was basically a set of filter banks, and this was the usual kind of.
Take a filter
that
bank,
they used to.
convert it into
Right.
a log spectrum
Right.
in decibels. And when you can define decibel, you have to have a reference.
Right.
The reference is you play the noise, whatever noise you're playing, through the filter bank, and you get the normalization factor. That's your reference.
Right.
Now you play the speech plus noise
Right.
through it, and relative to the noise alone, you create a reference, you convert it to decibels, and you plot it with the decibel scale being intensity. And it's a function of 3 variables: time, frequency, and signal-to-noise ratio.
And there would be a stack of these plates at different signal-to-noise
Right.
ratios.
So this one's at 0, there's one at 10, there's one at 20, one at 30. You make a cut through that, wham, and that's what this is. So this high-frequency burst goes to 0 dB SNR. We want an automated way of doing that. Now, in this case, we froze the noise. Because if you didn't freeze the noise, every time you compute it, you get a different number. And it's very confusing. And so we froze the noise. But when we make these presentations to the subjects, we randomize the noise. Every single trial, they hear a different noise, okay?
So I guess my question is, where is step 2 coming in? Because step 2, it looks
Step-
like that peak will die down or something.
Step 1, you take the AI-gram and you know that the information is at this burst, and you integrate across frequency and you find out where the burst is.
Okay.
You take this time, you feed it
Okay.
back into the AI-gram, and you make the event gram.
Okay,
And
so
then you
step
take-
2's job is just to find which slice you want.
T star.
Okay,
Finds T star.
okay.
And then from T star, you find SNR star, which is where this thing goes into the noise floor, and then you correlate the SNR star against where the score comes out of saturation.
Is the T star different at different SNRs? Or do you choose it from the cleanest signal you have?
It probably varies a little bit, but
So
not.
in other words, it's not exact slice, vertical slice, it might vary a little bit. And
Well, I don't think it depends very much on the signal-to-noise ratio, but you could iterate the process if you wanted to get fancy, but it's just not necessary. Yeah, so you can move, this program that I'm showing you can makes event grams, and I can move the time around. That's one of the things that I have access to down here on the bottom. I can change the time of the AI gram, and I can change the signal-to-noise ratio. Now what I want to do is to go to minus 10 dB SNR. Working? Okay, and now I want to play this. How many people hear Tay? How many people hear Pay? How many people hear K?
Try it again.
How many people want to hear?
What's beeping? I don't think I'll answer my phone. So this is what our
Would you
our
play it
subjects.
again, please?
Yeah, I will. Our subjects mostly report Pay. They also report K, and they also report some Tays. If I go to more noise, then they just report Pay and K. But if I go to this point right there, where's the crossover point between Pay and Tay, that's at, let's say, -6. That's an interesting and important place to go. And I want to make a point about this. So now I'm sitting right at the crossover point. Now you have to appreciate, this crossover point is the average of all of our subjects. And there's no such thing as an average subject. But now if I play the sound at this signal-to-noise ratio, what does it mean that half of the time the subjects report Pay and half the time the subjects report Tay? How can it be? Well, let's just explore this. I'm going to play it. How many people heard Tay? How many people heard Pay? Okay, so most people heard Pay. I'm going to tell you that you're going to hear Tay. Okay? You're going to hear Tay. How many people heard Tay? Okay, now I'm going to tell you you're going to hear Pay. Okay? You're going to hear Pay. I'm going to play Pay. How many people heard Pay? I'm going to just play it back and forth, and you're going to listen, think Pay, then think Tay, then think Pay. Whatever you think, that's what you'll hear, if you're like the average subject. Pay. 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 Now Now, this is highly unideal.
Well, I got into a groove and it was pay all the time, no matter what I thought.
I have a solution to that problem. So you're the guy with the above 60-year-old, I won't say how old you are,
What- so-
ears. We'll go up by 6 dB signal to noise ratio, which puts us right there, okay?
Oh, yeah.
You said you heard pay all the time.
Yeah.
Pay, 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 pay.
Now I hear tail.
We just had a hearing test performed, okay? And you're a positive on a hearing test for high frequency signal to noise ratio. You have a signal to noise ratio loss. You need more signal to noise ratio to get that tag. Point taken.
It's okay, he's not my dean. If he was my dean, I'd sue him.
But the expectation of whether it's going to be pay or take, isn't that exactly why you need to incorporate the prior probabilities into this model?
Sure.
Okay.
I never said that there weren't prior probabilities. I said they're a very powerful effect and you need to control for them. If I put that sound, pay-tay, into a sentence, we're all going to now have a cup of tea in London. You would hear it as tay. But if I said, I've got $5 that I want to pay you, then you would hear pay. So language, sure, language is important. Context is important. We all know that. You guys are trying to convince me that context is important. I know context is important. That's why we have to control for it. You can't do an experiment unless you control for it. But it's not the problem. It has nothing to do with robustness of speech and noise. It's the wrong problem to work on if you want to understand how humans decode speech. You've got to get the raw phone score under control before you can go for the language thing. I mean, you can do anything you want, and everybody chooses to go for the language thing because that's what turns them on. Fine. That's good for me because this means I got this whole field to myself. That's great. Okay? Anyway.
But when I find that when you sort of solve the whole process of, then I guess there is an abductive step there, which is finding that this point at 17 and 20 seconds is the point which is distinguishing.
Right. It took Marion 6 weeks to figure that out. Sure.
Yeah. But anyway, that's sort of the critical point here.
Yes. But once you find it, it's brain dead obvious. Okay? So you do need to have a funding source. It does take time, it takes students, it takes energy, and it takes a good experimental design. And you have to believe that the problem can be solved if you carefully go after it in a systematic way and you develop a theory. And you got to solve the right problem. So we developed a tool based on the short time Fourier transform that allows us to selectively mask the speech with noise at specific times and frequencies. Now, I already showed you that tool as a demo. And we did this so that we could mask specific regions of the speech signal and find out where the information is lurking, what's important and what's not important. And we can selectively amplify regions to increase intelligibility. I can take a ta that sounds like a pa and selectively amplify a very, very specific region, and it'll become a ta. And I can take a pa and convert it into a ta. I just did that the other day. And I can take bas and turn them into kas. Well, I'm not sure about that. Pas into kas. I mean, and this is an extremely powerful tool. And if I sit and play with a particular phone, you pick it and you play with it for an hour, you'll learn something fundamental about that phone. And it's just, I'm overpowered with information. I need a lot more students and a lot more time. It's a tedious process of finding the sweet spot, like the point you just made. But once you find it, it's easy to design an experiment to go after that and demonstrate what it is. And what we need is a whole bunch of crank turning with this tool and some students to lock in the closet and tell them don't come out until you give me a feature. Miles.
So I wonder whether the 6-week time needed for this could be shortened by any kind of mining of production data. You're doing this by synthesis, if I understand, and by synthesizing sounds and then asking people to listen to the sounds. And that's a great way to
No,
validate.
we're not synthesizing sounds. We're taking the original speech and we're just modifying a piece of it.
Yeah, exactly. But you need human listeners to do that, which means that it takes.
Part of the crank turning is you don't just have one person listening to it. You have one person listening to it to set up the experiment and design all the stimuli, but then you have to go back and do a verification task against a lot of naive subjects.
Right.
And that's the time-consuming part.
So the question is, if you're trying to figure out where to look, which part of the spectrogram to look at, or the diagram to look at, could you, for example, elicit productions from lots of different subjects many times over of different
Now
sounds?
that we
and then
know,
there's data mining?
now that we know that if we look, we can find it, we're getting a lot better at knowing where to look. I mean, it's really, the first one 6 weeks, the second one 2 weeks, the third one 15 minutes.
I've been surprised by the way you presented this to us, because naively, if I know that T would be confused with P, the first thing I would try to look at is P and compare it with T. You didn't show P to us. And is there any information there? Was it?
Well, if I had shown you P, then you'd say, why didn't you show me T?
No, both of them, and compare them.
Well, I'm doing the best I can. I'm trying to.
No, but so the question is there any information in P? Could you guess that would be the region of interest is the one that is in green there by looking at P and T?
Mid frequencies. Look at mid frequencies, and K is above that. I mean, there's a famous paper we were just talking about yesterday by Lieberman, Haskins Laboratories, Lieberman, Delattre, and Cooper, and who else? And they used synthesized sounds painted on glass back in the 50s, 40s, and they understood some of this stuff. But this is a much more complex version, modern day version of what they were doing, which I think is also more powerful because it's much more general and we don't assume, they assumed a million things. So we can go in and analyze, I can do it live here, analyze pay, or go in and analyze K, and we could learn something new and unique about each one of those sounds, and you have to do that on all of the sounds in the set, and you play with it. It's a very, very time-consuming thing, but eventually, you tell me which one we're going to learn about, and we can go and learn about that one.
But you do it separately. You don't have
one at a time.
A comparative approach to guess why.
So there's at least 3 approaches we've taken. One is to use the natural variability of the speech sounds, and the Tay is an example of that. There's a 40 dB variation in the energy of the burst. And by looking at the different sounds, you can see some of them have a high signal-to-noise ratio where they get in trouble, some have a low signal-to-noise ratio where they get in trouble, and you use the natural variability of the speech as the tool to investigate this. The second method is to go after it with a short-time Fourier transform. That's most fun and the most flexible, and also the slowest. The third method is, I'm about to show you, is to use time truncations.
John, I don't know if you're going to touch on this, but there's a fourth, much slower way, and that's to modify the cochlea and the cochlear processing and see what effect that has on.
Well, how do you get closure on that one? I mean, what do you go in there and you screw around with people's cochleas and you ask them?
No, cats.
Well, you can't ask a cat whether it was a Tay or a Pay.
Why not?
Well, we are doing that with Shehab, but in a couple of years we'll get an answer. We're doing just fine the way we are. And eventually, you need to trace it back to the physiology of the outer hair cells and how they are failing to process these leading edges and giving the cochlear amplification. And yes, that research needs to be done, but until we first demonstrate that it is leading edges and where the information is, nobody's going to be motivated to do that. They're going to continue to use ALSRs. Right?
Wrong.
Okay.
Now that I've heard this.
Okay. Good. It's not about steady state processing. It's not about long-term spectral properties. It's about transient timing. Okay, so we did a series of experiments where we took about, I don't know the exact number, let's say 10 different consonants, and we truncated them from the onset. Now, this was done by Furui in 1986, reported in JASA on some Japanese things. He didn't use noise. We did it at 12 dB and at 0 dB SNR. Enoch told me the problem with this is blah, 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 and so we went back and redid it according to a different procedure because I agreed with Enoch that Furui made a serious mistake by not putting the noise in there. So when you take a 1-1 subject 11, male subject 111 saying TA, ta, at 12 dB or at 0 dB, and you truncate the sound in 5 millisecond steps, and then add the noise to 12 dB or add the noise to 0 dB without any truncation, the noise spectral levels were always the same. There's this abrupt transition from te to pe. Abrupt, within 5 milliseconds. Well, what does that tell you? Now, Furui first observed this. I said,
I don't understand where you truncated it. You keep the beginning and you...
no, we truncate from the onset, from the very, very beginning. So we truncate, first we don't truncate anything.
On which side of the sound you keep delaying the onset? I mean, you keep cutting off the onset, or you keep cutting off the coda?
The onset.
The onset.
We truncate, at this point, the T burst is gone.
I
So
see.
when you truncate the T burst, it becomes pa.
Uh-huh.
And you truncate the pa, and it stays pa for starting at 35, and finally at 110 milliseconds, it becomes ba. And this is a robust finding. We did this for every pa in the database.
My understanding is correct. I mean, 30 years ago, this was a well-known secondary characteristic of voice to stop consonants that some were inherently shorter and others longer. And if the frequency cue was ambiguous, then you would go with the duration cue. That's what you're playing with here? The secondary cue of...
We're just truncating it from the onset, and we observe that when you truncate the T burst off, it becomes pa.
Well, because voice, in nature, isn't it true that the labial aspirations are always shorter, or tend to be shorter than the dentals, which tend to be shorter than the velars?
I can't answer your question.
I mean, this fits exactly with what you would expect. If you made the frequency cue ambiguous or unavailable, then the shorter the voice onset time, the more the tendency.
Well, this is consistent with the T burst being the distinguishing feature, and when you remove the T burst, it becomes pop. This is the same thing we were just playing with a minute ago. When I removed the T burst, you heard pop. There I selectively did it with a short time Fourier transform. Here I'm just doing it brute force by truncating in 5 millisecond steps. When you eat the T burst, bang, you hear pop. And the scores are 100%, and it doesn't make any difference if you're at 12 or 0 dB SNR.
Why is it no K? Why is it no K response?
This is the data. I don't even know why it's a pay.
Well, I think the reason there's no K response is because K bursts are typically longer than T's even.
K's in a different, the burst is in a different frequency range.
Sure. I mean,
So our hypothesis is that a P is it's a root consonant, and when you add things to it, you can get other kinds of sounds. So by fooling around with P, you can get a T, you can get a ka, you can get a B. We have this concept of a root consonant, and it's the core, it's the most robust, and then you add filigree to it, and you can get it to be other things.
I mean, most phoneticians would explain it in terms of articulatory facts.
Yeah, but articulatory facts don't have anything to do with single noise ratio. And I just showed you two tas that behave completely differently when you add noise. And how do you explain that with articulatory variables? They don't know anything about noise. This is not a problem of production, this is a problem of perception.
Well, you misunderstand me. Secondary cues arise from articulatory constraints. So
You are telling me a theory that you have learned over the years that has failed
It fits
largely. It fits, everything fits one piece of data. I mean, you know, and I show you another piece of data and they'll come up with another theory. This is a problem. We need one theory, not three of them. And we want it to be a proof. We want it to be a mathematical closure on the problem so that there's no more wiggle room. This is it. That's it. We don't need to do any more work on that one. We now know what that one is. Then we move on to the next one. He's got severe, profound hearing loss, and so I was saying sa, za, da, da, and he operates a chance on these things. He can't get them. So he has a high frequency time. He can't discriminate, high frequency timing. That's a very important thing to know, because that's where we got to put our effort to make a better hearing aid. And this is true from every ear that we've measured. We've measured 16 hearing impaired ears, and they're all different. They all have a different set of consonants that they have trouble with. And there's most of them, they're fine. Most hearing impaired people work just fine over 80% of the sounds, and 20% of the sounds they're struggling with, and each person has a different 20%. That's an extremely important piece of information. Now, this is the coolest thing of all, I think, because it's a generalization on timing. So here is a na. I would like a volunteer who's got a big ego, it's not going to feel bad, if they're wrong. I would like you to tell me what it is that distinguishes a na from a ma. Anybody have an opinion? There's all these people with these
Point of articulation.
point of articulation. What's that mean?
Well, M is bilabial and Na is alveolar.
Well, I give you
Come
the
up with a graph?
spectrogram, and you have to tell me what it is. What is the acoustic feature in the spectrogram that is being used to discriminate na from ma? This transition, this form of transition, right? Well, wrong. It's not true. That's not what's giving you. Where the information is in this time versus that time. Now I'm going to demonstrate that. I hope. I'm going to try to demonstrate that. It's very hard to work at an angle like this. Here are the scores. This is the control. This is the original na, and we played that at all these different signal and noise ratios. And when you got above about minus 12, 100% of the time they said it was not, which it was. It was not. Then we edited the waveform like this, so it comes on abruptly. We just removed all of this junk here, and everybody said it was a ma.
But presumably a real ma would have some jump over there.
But John, this is exactly the same thing as 2 slides ago. Whether you have trading cues and you're measuring one and claiming that therefore the other has no power, has no effect. I mean, the opening of the lips is virtually instantaneous. The movement of the tongue takes time, and these are all well-known facts. But when there are multiple cues, measuring one and showing that it has effect does not mean that the other cue is not present or is not important. I mean, none of these things contradict what you're saying, but why deny them? I mean, the format is there. It is a cue.
It's not a cue.
Oh, okay, all right, fine.
So I have.
Here is a natural ma, and everything comes on at the same time, and we edit and create a delay, and people report it as not.
But short duration onsets with instantaneous change always, what shall I say, biased towards the labial.
So you're telling me you already knew this?
Well, I mean, it's just.
But if we already knew it, why aren't we using the information?
So I'm struck by some interesting things about the pictures that you're showing here. The first one is the time scale. So here it goes up, I don't know, 48's kind of in the middle. Some of the previous ones were 60, I think, 60 milliseconds.
This is a different utterance, so the time scales are all going to be different. And this is subject 105 saying ma, and the previous one was subject 105 saying na. So the timescales are completely different because it's a different utterance.
Okay, so where I was, where I was going with this was that in a lot of the front ends that are used now, you take an analysis window and you do HLDA. You essentially stack up all the frames within that window, and then you find a linear projection that tends to separate the sounds. And so in each row of that projection, you essentially have a weighted combination of all the entries in your spectrogram. And so you might assume that that row is essentially a feature detector. It's taking a weighted combination of all the entries in the spectrogram that you're analyzing. And it does so in such a way that, the final feature vectors, if you model each sound with one or more Gaussians, those Gaussians tend to be well separated with different sounds. And so there's a couple of questions. One is, I wonder the features that you get from doing that kind of automatic analysis. It would be interesting to know how those features compare with the features that you get here. And it also suggests that you could identify features here by, for example, taking a bunch of sounds, muzz, and then taking a bunch of na sounds, and then doing, say, HLDA on that and finding a projection down into 1 or 2 dimensions, and then looking at what you're doing to the matrix to get those 1 or 2 dimensions.
Fine. But you can hypothesize experiments like that, and many people have done exactly those things, and they always end up, go back and look at 20 years of speech research, and you never get a strong conclusion about anything. What's the raw phone score for the best recognizer today? It's about 50% in quiet, and it doesn't tolerate any noise at all. So it's just not finding the right features, and we've got a lot of smart people working
Maybe
on
it's
this.
finding the same features that you're finding. How do you know it's not finding the same features you're finding?
Because it would work better.
Have you tried this and measured performance?
I don't have time for it, okay?
Well, then how do you know it works together?
I know how humans work. This is human performance I'm talking about. Human performance, I showed you, it's for mana, it's 1 in 1,000 is the error rate in quiet. And it's robust to minus 15 dBSNR, still well better than 50% errors. With the machine scores, the error rates are 50% in quiet, and as soon as you go to 0 dBSNR, you know everything is a SA.
But that's a comment on the humans, not on this analysis. You can't attribute it to this analysis.
I didn't say there was anything wrong with the analysis,
make
but
it
the analysis,
operational and get that same error
the
rate.
analysis has to be driven by a very, very smart piece of information. And the problem is you don't have that information because you don't have these confusion matrices to drive the process. And there's a huge amount of variability from one utterance to the next. And when you average all this stuff together, garbage in, garbage out.
Just a quick question. I'm trying to establish, I'm following the analysis so far, and I'm wondering whether I'm really understanding what you're defending here. So if we have ma, na, nya, so we have all 4 nasals in the language, would you still maintain for some reason that there is that no formant transitions are, that the form transitions are not cues?
I wouldn't say anything about it because I haven't tried it. But on an N of 1, we could look at mana, and in the case of mana, I'm about to demonstrate to you, I'm sure I run out of time a long time ago, but I would be happy to demonstrate to you in a convincing, I hope it's a convincing way, that ma and na, that na is not, you're not listening to that formant transition. So I'll take this sound, F105, at minus 2 dB SNR in speech-weighted noise, and I'm going to remove the formant transition, and we'll see what happens to that hypothesis. It was at F105, right? Yeah. In speech-weighted noise.
What do you put in its place?
What?
What do you put in its place?
I'm just going to remove it.
The energy?
Well, just watch. F105. Na. And I got to get the vowel. Na. And we're going to, first I have to open it. And then we're going to put it at, what was the signal noise Tricia? 0? So if we go to -6, let's go to -2. Okay, now that you can see everything at -2, so that's cool. No. How many people here now? Everybody. Okay, now I'm going to snap this guy over here, and I'm going to do an edit. I'm going to set to 0 everything. I'm going to remove the transition. I'm going to remove that. I don't like exactly what I did, but I'm going to go with it, and we'll see what happens. So this is now what it looks like, and now I'm going to play the tube, and you'll see the energy come back in that region. I'll point to it with the laser pointer. No. Now, I don't hear a difference. How many people hear a difference? I'll play it again. So basically, I've removed the formant transition, and I cannot hear, literally cannot hear the difference. Now I'm going to modify this in a different way. I'm going to make this thing come on abruptly all at the same time, like I was telling you about. And if I've done my job, and I may have screwed up by not including this. And I'm telling you, this is the ear is a very strange thing. It's extremely sensitive to slight changes. And then, so it's kind of a mob, but it's not good enough. And the problem is that this little piece of energy needs to be removed.
I invite people to hear it as nah. Try it.
Say it again.
Nah.
Nah?
Nah.
Well, I can't even say it, but this.
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to reset it. Do you want me to continue to do this a little bit?
What's the time?
Well, I know.
Otherwise we lose the audience.
So I can make, if I play with this for a few minutes, I'm doing it live, and it takes quite a bit of experience. The thing I failed to do is to take out this piece of energy. If we make it look like you have to take my word for it a little bit here. This was a rock solid mop, and it sounded completely natural. And she edited down to a lower cutoff frequency of about 0.6, and I didn't go low enough. But if I did, this is the same sound, F105 nah, and she's at -2, and she edited it like this, and she gets 100% mop. So I can go on like this, and I think it's actually quite informative, but I only want to go on long enough that I'm convincing you that these timing cues are critically important. And I don't want to go on longer than that because I'll overstay my welcome.
I think at this point, either people are convinced or they are not. But I think that what we may want to hear is some sort of conclusion or some sort of what is it that we should take home? Because maybe we can play with it a little bit later and people with the headphones. I think that this is not quite fair played over the, like this. Sometimes you can hear it, sometimes you don't. But I think what we would like...
So what's happened here is that I have several students, Marion being the most productive, who have carefully analyzed these for 6 months, playing with the program, editing waveforms, listening to it, running verification experiments, and this timing thing holds up in court when you really push it hard. And she's done a very beautiful job of demonstrating that, in my opinion. It's written up, and within the week, it will be submitted to JASA, and I invite you to read the manuscript. I gave a copy to Heenek. You can look at it and tell us what's wrong and help us fix the problem so that when we do submit it, it'll get accepted for publication. It's about timing. Now, that's not the only cue. Duration is an important cue. And timing is an important cue above a kilohertz. At lower frequencies, no. Something else is going on. And when it comes to vowels, no, something else is going on. But for a good number of the consonants, more than half of them, timing is critically important. We also did a whole bunch of experiments where we remove energy. Like you could remove this entire block of energy, and either two things possibly can happen. One, you don't hear it at all because of forward masking, or it sounds a little muffled, or it sounds slightly changed, but absolutely does not change its identity. So if you want to do something that's going to mess with the identity, the confusions, play with the leading edges, change the timing a little bit, and you get dramatic effects. You can't always predict what it'll be.
How many cues? Can you give a sense of roughly how many cues it takes to distinguish all the different phonemes, or all the different consonants?
Log base 2 is the number of phonemes. There's 20 different consonants. You take log base 2 and you get 4 bits.
No, but I mean, I think you've already shown more than 4 different pictures. So there must, I mean, that can't be the answer.
What's wrong with that answer?
Okay.
I mean, if you want to take all possible languages into account, and you want to look at subtle variations on na in different ways that you can, there are many different kinds of nas, and you can break out subsets, then those, there are more than 4 bits. If you really, but it depends on how hard you categorize them.
But I mean, so you're actually claiming that you can define 4 different timing cues, say 4 different pictures that you're going to show, and with those 4 different cues, the presence or absence of those 4 different cues, you can distinguish between all the phones in English, all the consonants in English, say.
I haven't shown that.
I'm asking, are you saying that? Not are you showing that?
I didn't say that.
So my question is, how many timing cues do you think you would need to distinguish between all the consonants in English?
I don't know. But I've just, in the last year, nailed down the fact that it's onset timing that's critically important, and we're trying to explore that and find out what, what's the next step. We've done it with a half a dozen different consonants, and it pretty much always turns out to be the same thing. It's onset timing and duration, and there are lots of places in the speech you can completely, it's not about modulations. It's not about the modulation at 2 hertz. If you have a modulation detector operating above a kilohertz, delete the code. It's completely irrelevant because of forward masking. When this onset occurs here, you can't hear anything after that for at least 50 to 100 milliseconds because it's masked. So the idea of having modulation detection that's going in there, modulation filter bank styled after Dow, that's going in there and looking at different modulations in this frequency region, it's a waste of time to go there because it's masked. You can't hear it. So if you can't hear it, you can't detect modulations. So very, very important set of guidelines under which we can now go. We can refine our look, and we know much better now what we have to look for and what we have to, yeah.
Yeah, I think that you are almost answering what I wanted to ask, but it's related also to Jeff. So most of us here are actually interested in building machines. And we know that perception can help us a lot, or from past experience, at least this was my experience, to know more you know about the way people perceive speech, can help you to build a better machine. What kind of advice you could give us? I already had one, which is a little bit painful for me because we are using a lot of modulation, spectrum processing, and that sort of thing. But maybe we can try to delete the code for the modulation spectrum processing about 1 kilohertz and see what happens. But what would you, you know enough about how the speech is done, at least in the mainstream recognizers, based on the spectral slices, and as Jeff mentioned, maybe blocks of the time spectral plane, and with different discriminative techniques for pre-processing. What would you do? What would you change? I mean, if you, based on your experience of over the past 3 years or past 4 years.
If you look at a neural tuning curve at, let's say, 5 kilohertz, this is log frequency, this is 5 kilohertz, and this threshold is at 20 dB SPL, and you now hit it with a large signal, the tuning curve changes its sensitivity by up to and maybe more than 40 dB, and then it recovers over time back to its original. And it recovers with the voltage is proportional to e to the minus t over 10 milliseconds. And it's 1 volt, 1 dB threshold per millivolt. So this is the voltage, and it's 1 dB per millivolt, so the decibels, the threshold is recovering at a 10 millisecond time constant. This comes from an analysis of outer hair cell membrane time constants, etc. And this 1 volt per millivolt comes from Sewell, who published a paper. Sewell, he said, at Eaton Peabody Laboratory, which
I assume you talk about temporal masking between E and the front end.
Let me finish. So, you take this edge, or this burst. What happens is, it's very sensitive to the onset. It hears, the ear hears this onset, but the gain gets turned down immediately. So all of this becomes masked. So coming out of the real cochlea, all you see is that edge.
But we do that. We already do that. That much. That much we do, John. We can enhance transitions. We suppress what happens after that. We do that.
Okay.
What else do you?
Well, I can't.
Because what I hear is that timing is important, so there's definitely we should look.
You gotta. I'd like to hear more about how you're enhancing these edges.
All you have to do is to put your trajectories through the high-pass filter like we do in Rasta, and what happens is that transitions get enhanced, and what happens behind that gets suppressed.
Well, I would say that the details, the gory details of how you do it, you don't start with an LPC analysis, which is super non-robust to noise. Use a good cochlear filter bank,
Sure.
and you integrate this nonlinearity into the filter bank somehow, and we need to verify that it indeed is detecting these transients. And
So you would say the more careful modeling of the periphery would be very useful, or?
well, we've been doing that for many, many years, so I don't think doing more modeling of the periphery is appropriate at this point. We need to take advantage of what we already know and put a better front end and stop with this silliness about we don't want to solve the speech recognition problem in noise. We don't care about noise. Let's look at noise. Look at we've got individual predictions about individual sounds and how they behave with noise. Start looking at the recognizers and see how they behave. Make confusion patterns for individual sounds and start matching some of this stuff. My understanding is that the automated ASRs are so far away from the performance of this that you just got a million miles to go before you can start worrying about the gory details.
But again, we all know that. I mean, this is, nobody argues about this. If it is, it's better or worse, I don't know, but it's different.
So
That's for sure.
then-
Machines work differently. It's no
What
question.
can we do that gets us closer to the human answer? Because the human answer is so much better than the machine answer that there must be something we can do to make the machines work better. I mean, they're so far away from human performance that it should be possible to find something that's going to fix it, okay? If you run confusion patterns, you find, tell me which sounds are the least robust to noise. Well, you can tell me they're all have high error. Well, let's start with one that works best and try to improve it. Let's start with the one that's worst and try to fix it. Let's look for some basic principles. I think if you had this edge detection in there and you're looking at the right timing, you're going to start getting better performance because that's where the information is. You're going to discriminate mas from nas better.
But in a way, when you do modulation spectrum processing or something, you are looking at the timing. This is what you do.
In a very different way.
Yes, but that's what you do. You look over the period of time. You look at the time, at the dynamics of the time spectral pattern.
Well, this
So-
Cochlea is doing nonlinear
Yeah,
edge
sure.
enhancement.
Yeah, but we are engineers, so whatever is non-linear as approximation, it is linear, and we typically do linear first. And if it helps, then we may do the second order approximation, we do quadratic and cubic and so on, and Taylor series, and if it is non-linear, or we try to put it into the domain where it becomes more linear, but this is an engineering, right? So I wanted to hear the words basically from you towards the end of the talk. Like, what is it that we should be doing? You say we shouldn't be doing more careful modeling of periphery, but what? And I heard we should throw away the modulation spectrum. But what else?
Above a kilohertz. Above a kilohertz. So I think we've made some progress. We've made some progress in that we can definitively say what people are listening to, several sounds. We don't have 6 hypotheses that are floating around. We've got what I consider to be close to a mathematical proof that you're listening to certain things and you're not listening to certain other things. And this is, given the complexity and the difficulties of this problem, that's a very important direction to go in, to get rid of some of these loosey-goosey, loose ends, where it could be this, it could be that, we're not quite sure. There's lots of features in the speech, it's redundant. I don't think speech is all that redundant, personally. So let's stop the vague, really good claims and get down to what are the real features and how do we do that. And I think this is a procedure for doing that. And yeah, it's not easy, but it's doable. And when, at the end of the day, you have an answer that nobody can argue with. They can say, oh, we already knew that,